bringing you a steady stream of thought-provoking ideas and cutting-edge innovation. You're listening to Society and the State. Life, liberty, and your pursuit of happiness. Now, your hosts, Connor Boyack and Brian Hyde.
Once again, welcome to Society and the State. Brian Hyde along with Connor Boyack. And today we're going to talk about initiatives, ballot initiatives. This is something that's happening not just in our home state of Utah, but actually all across the fruited plains. And it raises some very interesting questions. And Connor, we have lawmaking bodies in every state. We have legislatures and I forget what else they're called, assemblies, who are tasked with lawmaking. But sometimes the voice of the citizenry is heard through the power of the initiative. And I'd like to just get your gut reaction. Do initiatives, does direct democracy have its place in a representative system of government?
There's the old Connor view and the new Connor view, I guess.
This I want to hear.
Yeah, so and maybe we'll have a little disagreement here. I'll be curious to see how this shakes out. So, not even growing up, but I should say over the past decade in my more kind of constitutional leanings, I was very much of the mind that, well, we need a republic and we need a constitution and we need this body of law and we need wise men and we need, deliberations to determine what's right and so on and so forth. And chief at the foundation of that was this idea of a republic. A republic is superior. It was what the founding fathers repeatedly argued. They did not create a democracy. They denigrated democracy, in fact. The word democracy does not appear anywhere in this nation's founding documents. And democracy was rightly perceived by them as Benjamin Franklin once quipped, and I'm paraphrasing here, it's, what is it, 2 lambs and a lion, or 2 lions and a lamb, or whatever, voting on what should be for lunch, right? I probably butchered that. But you get my point. When everything is subject to a vote, when everything is subject to the will of the majority, then there are no rights of the minority. And I think there is theoretical merit to that. I think in theory that sounds good. In practice, I don't know that it's ever possible. Because even in the Republic of America, things have devolved to the point where, sure, we have a constitution, but that can be amended. That is often ignored. And every act of Congress is effectively representative democracy. And so what virtue is there, and Brian, maybe this is where you push back, I don't know. What virtue is there in having a democracy in which a few people vote versus many people? What virtue is there in having 535 people vote who are controlled and financially manipulated and, owned by donors and so on and so forth, who can be lobbied and pressured and arm twisted? Why not decentralize that? Why not disperse that political power over many people to reduce the regulatory capture, to reduce the potential of any one vote being bought or stolen or twisted or whatever? So I've come to the point where it's not to say democracy is good. Rather, it's to say it's all bad. And I don't think a republic is suddenly this prestigious, amazing thing over and above, over and above a democracy. Even okay, I'm going to get religious just briefly to point out not a religious issue, but a historical issue. As a practicing Mormon, in the origins of my faith, when it got started with Joseph Smith and many other people in Illinois and Missouri and surrounding states, the Constitution was there. Those rights were supposedly protected, religious liberty, due process, and yet people were repeatedly jailed on specious charges. People were tarred and feathered, their homes, their property destroyed, stolen, and killed. And when redress was sought under this supposed, banner of heaven, this inspired constitution, time and again what it came down to was the people in power, the judges, would look the other way or were themselves part of the mob and part of the problem. And so, yes, it's great to have a constitution that theoretically guarantees those rights. But if the responsibility for enforcement of those rights relies upon people who are indifferent to those rights or hostile to those rights, then you might as well not have a constitution, which was the problem in the early Latter-day Saint Mormon history. It's why the founding prophet Joseph Smith actually ran for president to try and raise a warning flag about this very problem. So stepping back from the religious side, my point is to say I no longer really see a constitution or a republic or anything as being inherently superior to anything else. I think it always boils down to the people involved, the principles they espouse, and whatever outgrowth or form of government that works. I think we could have an amazing monarchy if you have the right king, you know. Anyways, I want to kick over to you, Brian, because I'm curious if we have a little bit of disagreement here that we can explore. But I come from a point where I once elevated this idea of the republic and the Constitution, but in all of my political dealings and seeing, especially with some of these issues for a ballot initiative, when that political process is hostile to people's rights, what recourse do you have? Okay, well, hey, here's the ballot initiative process. Let's use that. Why would we not? And we can get into that a little bit later. But on everything I said, I'm curious if there's any disagreement or what your thoughts are.
I think I'm mostly in agreement with you, although I've kind of undergone a very similar transformation myself. There was a time where I was absolutely 100% against the idea of citizen initiatives. And it's for this reason. You know, people chafe when you say, well, you know, direct democracy closely resembles a mob, you know, a lynch mob, in that we vote for what we wanted. We don't really care about, you know, rights. And let's face it, in directed democracy, people are easy to sway emotionally, especially with fear.
Yes.
Oh, man, you throw some fear and doubt at people, and you can stampede the herd in a direction that you want to go. Whereas with representative government, you know, we're supposed to be electing people who are going to thoughtfully and carefully study out the issues, study out the appropriate limitations on government, including the federal and state constitution, or, you know, whatever, their municipal bylaws, and they're supposed to abide by the laws. So for the longest time, I was more a fan of, you know, let's stick with representative government, make sure we're electing good people. But I do think you have a very valid point. And in that, what you described was it was proof that Lord Acton's observation about how power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely, it seems to apply to government at whatever level.
And one of the holes, I think, in the argument, not your argument, but the one you raised, Brian, is to say, okay, some people see this division between the mob. As you point out, they can be easily swayed with fear. Or, you know, I think we have a lot of low information voters where they don't really know what they're voting on, right? And they
speak in sound bites or bumper stickers.
Totally. They saw a sign, right? Oh, yeah, that appealed to me, or that bumper sticker, that billboard. So that's a problem, right? And then, Brian, to the other point you raised, well, yeah, we want to instead elect a group of people who are wise and who can be charged with digging into those issues and voting on them. And yet who votes those people in office? The
mob.
Right. The very same mob that can still be subjected to fear and low information and bumper stickers, which politicians know and exploit. So why do we think that one degree of separation, one layer on top of that mob suddenly and substantively changes anything? I just don't think that it does. And I've been now in state politics long enough to know that plenty of elected officials are low information voters. Plenty of them can have their arms twisted or vote based on fear. That's not to say all, or perhaps not even a majority. It depends on the issue. But as individuals, we're all susceptible to ignorance, of not knowing what we're now immediately asked to vote on, of fear, of peer pressure, right? And these things don't change when suddenly someone is imbued with the power of the state and to be able to cast a representative vote. So I guess my concern, Brian, is that if you and I have a little bit of agreement on this, I anticipate that perhaps a lot of our listeners don't. Okay, so let's maybe operate from that assumption for a moment, that a lot of the people listening are like, whoa, wait a minute, you know, like I reverence the republic. This is what we want. This is superior. This is, you know, established by God, or this, that, and the other. And so, you know, as a former radio host, you've talked to a lot of people about these. Well, and you got a radio show now too. In fact, we ought to talk about that sometime on a future episode of what you're up to with Loving Liberty. I don't know. Let me ask this. How do you bring someone to your point of view who has been a staunch supporter of constitutionalism and republics and so forth? If you've now had a little bit of this transformation, do you perceive a way to help other people have the same?
Well, I haven't figured out anything that I could bottle and sell yet, but the best argument that I can make is, if a Republican form of government, by which, you know, a republic or a constitutional form of government really is our goal, then we could probably just condense that by saying, look, so we're talking about limited or a proper role of government. And that's where I would try to make the case. If the citizen initiative vote is to expand government power over us, I think that's a dangerous thing. On the other hand, if those who hold elected office have not listened to the citizenry, and the citizenry at some point says, you know what, we need to step up and we need to limit the power of government over us because our elected leaders, for whatever reason, whether it's special interests or fear or whatever is keeping them from limiting government's power in this area, we need to do that ourselves. So in that respect, I actually support the citizen initiative if it is being undertaken to limit government to its proper role. If it's being undertaken to expand government power, to create new rights or new privileges for us, I think it's a very dangerous thing. And I think politicians understand it's very easy to sway the crowd in those instances with fear, guilt, etc.
I think that's right. Like it's like a gun or the internet or matches or candy, right? Like any tool can be used in a good way or misused or abused to harm others, right? A gun can be a tool for self-defense, to save yourself, save your family, protect your children. That's a wonderful thing to have to deter a threat, right? So we don't want to ban that tool because it's good for a lot of people. So too can that very same tool be used to go out and harm people. And I think a lot of people, when it comes to the state, when it comes to politics, have this kind of, near deified, reverential aura around the process where they see it primarily in good terms. They see it primarily as a function of, doing positive things. Even if they have their criticisms with that politician or with that bill, overall, the kind of reverence and deference to the broader institution, I think, is strong. And so along with that, then the question becomes, how do you undermine that? That sounds very negative, but how do you change that? And to me, let me get very specific for a moment. Right now in Utah, we're working on this effort to legalize medical cannabis. We worked on it legislatively, going through the established political, representative process for years. There was substantial indifference, substantial fear, callousness, resistance to change, conservation of the status quo. But really, I think fear was the strongest thing. It's, oh my gosh, if we were to do this, then there's going to be a dispensary on every corner, and kids are going to get high, and DUIs are going to go up, and the world will be horrible, and the sky will fall. And so after trying to assuage those fears, correct the misinformation, share patient stories, illustrate the suffering, et cetera, we ultimately were not successful after multiple attempts. And so think of it from the perspective of a patient, right? Like so many of these patients we work with who are suffering and made criminals because of the existing law. And so harm is being done to them by the status quo. Are they going to sit around? Do we think it's right for them to sit around and say, well, yeah, we should just wait until, we can elect someone new into the legislature, and maybe things will be different, and maybe we have to wait for the election cycle 2 years after that, or 2 years. Yeah, is it just and moral and appropriate for me to wait several years on the hope that maybe these people will change their mind, or is there another avenue to pursue? And I've come down on the side of throw mud against the wall and see what sticks. If we can increase liberty using a tool, let's use that tool. If that means going through the legislature, awesome, right? And that's typically what we do with our organization at Libertas Institute. If it means going through the courts and suing the government to increase freedom, you bet I'm going to do that, right? And we've done a little bit of that. And if it means going through the ballot process, if it means enabling the people to exercise their inherent and supposedly sovereign authority to amend the political process, to impact the political process, why would we sit on our hands and not take advantage of a tool, take advantage of an opportunity that can measurably and substantially increase freedom? And so to my friends, there are a few of them who are like, well, I support medical cannabis, but I don't like ballot initiatives. And I say, okay, imagine you're a patient and you're in this predicament. Are you just going to reverentially wait on the legislature and continue to suffer? Are you going to become a refugee and leave your family and your friends and your job and your support system and go to another state just because they give you that freedom? That to me is an inherent problem. And I come down on the side of whatever tool can increase liberty, I'm going to use that tool. That may not be the most well thought out position. It may not be the most philosophically sound position. And maybe over time, I'm going to give myself the opportunity to even change that position. But more recently, that is where I have come to, is to say, if there is a tool that will protect someone's rights and increase their freedom without harming other people, it's not like it's a balance where, yes, I saved 14 people's rights by destroying 243. No, that's not it at all. But if there's a way on balance or in a net effect to increase people's rights, I think we ought to use that tool. Brian, what are your thoughts?
No, I would agree. And I think the initiative process it's kind of like a fail-safe. It's what exists to remind our elected representatives that their job is to guarantee our natural rights, not to manage or micromanage our lives, or not to overstep their bounds and, dictate all of our personal decisions. And unfortunately, a lot of people have, drifted away from that mentality of they don't understand the flow of political power. They don't understand it originates with the people. We, the people, delegate certain powers to those that we elect, and we do it. We create government, not the other way around. Government didn't create us. We create government to protect those natural rights. And there's times, because you're dealing with human beings, where those who comprise government forget what their job is. And they really do believe, no, it's our job. With this clipboard and these rules, I am here to provide order in a disorganized universe. And they take it too far. So occasionally they need to have their wings clipped. And fortunately, those cases are rare, but that's where I would most strongly support the initiative process. It's to bring government back into its proper alignment and to correct, whatever wrongs it may have inadvertently occurred or inadvertently caused. But it can be abused. The initiative process, can still be a tool for mischief.
And I think that's why so many of us have a concern with that process, right? Like you get some George Soros or some wealthy lefty or whatever who sees that a conservative legislature is resistant to their ideas to increase taxes, right, or to do Medicaid expansion or whatever, and they say, look, if I invest, $2 million in this, we can have all these sappy ads on TV that convince everyone that, if you love children and apple pie and marshmallows, then you must vote for, Proposition A or whatever. And they can carpet bomb the public with propaganda and get their way because the lay person is not sophisticated enough oftentimes to really understand the full scope of what's happening, especially if there's not a counter push to have similar spending, similar ad buys to counter and rebut what is happening. If someone just saturates the airwaves and there's no good opposition to that, it's very easy to manipulate people into doing what you want and thereby, change the law in favor of whatever you wanted. So I totally get that concern. I get that guns are killing people left and right. I get that the internet is full of pornography that's a problem for children and, social media is addictive and bullying runs rampant. The answer is not to ban the tool, right? The answer is not to deny everybody the option from doing it. The challenge, I think, for us is to say it requires education. It requires personal responsibility. It requires stepping up. And so, too, I think with ballot initiatives, yes, it's going to be abused. In our state right here, right now, there are several horrible ballot initiatives. But there's also, from my perspective, with the medical cannabis one, a great one. And so, to me, the answer is not to say, I think ballot initiatives are horrible, direct democracy is awful, we shouldn't use it, the founders didn't like it. To me, it's to say, no, we need to improve our society to the point where there's a recognition that it's just a process, it's just a tool, and it can be used in good ways, and it can be and often is used in bad ways. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't take advantage of it if there's a way to increase liberty over the objections of a resistant legislative authority.
I think you said it about as well as it could be said.
Mic drop.
Look, there's going to be there currently is a lot of discussion. There's probably going to be a lot more discussion in the days ahead. I think what Connor just spoke, though, the idea of really contemplate, study things out for yourself, that is the key to being a good citizen. And I mean at every single level of government. Thanks again for joining us here on Society of the State. Recommend us to your friends. This is episode 113, and you can find it at societyinthestate.com/113. We've got more great guests, more thought-provoking discussion straight ahead.
Thanks for listening to Society and the State. For show notes, archives, and more great content, visit societyandthestate.com.